Idea Brew Studios presents All Indians Matter in depth.
Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer, and this is part 2 of our conversation on Mahatma Gandhi's murder with Tushar Gandhi, great-grandson of the Mahatma and president of the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation. He is also the author of the book Let's Kill Gandhi, a chronicle of Gandhi's last days, the conspiracy, murder, investigations and trial. In part 1, we spoke about the run-up to Gandhi's murder and the conspiracy. In this episode, we will talk more about the people involved. Tushar, who were the main players in the assassination and what role did each one of them play?
Ashraf, I don't like to call it an assassination because when you say assassination, there seems to be a kind of a legitimacy to it because it's supposed to be a politically motivated.
Let's call it a murder.
That's why I call it plainly a murder of Bapu because it was just a murder. And the ideology was also of a murderer and nothing more than that. The principal players, let's start with the people who got away. V.D. Savarkar was the linchpin of the murder because if you look at it, each and every accused was loyal, fanatically loyal to Savarkar. And there's no reason to believe that they all spontaneously came together unless they were ordered by their icon to do it. But if you look at all the actions of these fanatics, not only then but even in the more recent history, you will notice that it's always the ones who do the act who get caught. And the motivators and the conspirators and the inspirations for those acts go away scot-free. Look at the Babri Masjid. The courts say that it was an illegal act and carried out with malicious intent and all that. And yet, the accused are only the ones who actually demolished. The people who motivated or created that whole passion in the country to culminate in that attack have gone scot-free. The court has let them go scot-free. And so this was their modus operandi from the very beginning in history. And so in the Gandhi murder also the patrons and the organizers of the murder got away scot-free. Today the RSS says, we were not accused of the murder. We were not even in the list of accused in the court. How do you accuse an organization? How do you convict an organization? How do you punish? Because if you look at that justice system as it works, its culmination is in a punishment. No? So are they going to say the RSS must be hanged till death or shot by a firing squad? And so it's very natural that the organization gets away scot-free. And they covered their tracks. It's also alluded to in the Kapoor Commission. Unfortunately, the Kapoor Commission was not given that writ to find out the involvement of Savarkar, but all the evidence that they have brought together shows, and in their own way, Kapoor Commission ends with saying that the act could not have succeeded unless they had organizational support. So which was that organization that Kapoor Commission was alluding to, and who was heading that organization? If there was organizational support, that means that the entire chain of command of that organization is involved in that. And so the patron and chief who got away was Savarkar, and the organizations like Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. Now they are both fighting about the credit of who did it. A few years back, the Hindu Mahasabha openly made a statement saying, don't take our credit away. We have done it and we must get all the credit for it. Just like in the Babri Masjid demolition. There are claims and counterclaims of who was actually had done it. So that was it. But the accused in the Gandhi murder were Nathuram Godse, Nathuram Vinayak Godse, Narayan Apte, Vishnu Karkare, Digambar Badke, Shankar Kishtaya, Madanlal Pahwa and Gopal Godse. These were the accused in the Gandhi murder charge sheet that was filed. Each one of them has a very interesting backstory to them. The strange fact is that Nathuram was not his real name. So the backstories for all of them, and very interesting characters, each one of them, and very interesting the way they all came together, the motivations that they had, But the single motivation for their coming together was their fanatic loyalty to their icon and patron, Savarkar. Each one of them. Even Madan Lal, who was a late entrant as a refugee hothead, used to boast about how Savarkar praised him for his acts of terror in Aurangabad, in Ahmednagar, and how he, blessed him to continue with the actions and sort of pushed him towards the conspiracy with his encouragement. So each one of them, and Parchure, Dr. Parchure of Gwalior, was also an accused who got away. And the only reason Parchure got away, because there was a direct established link of him providing the gun, the murder weapon, to the murderer. The only reason he was allowed to get away on a technicality, because his defense proved that he was a citizen of Gwalior, the Principality of Gwalior, and not of India. So he should have been arrested by getting him extradited from Gwalior. But he was arrested in Gwalior because by that time Gwalior had already acceded to India. The formalities had not been carried out, and that's the citizenship issues and everything was there. But he had already, and so Parchure was arrested and brought to Delhi. His defense counsel proved in the High Court. In the Red Fort trial, he was convicted. It was in the High Court appeal that his defense counsel managed to create doubts about the confessional statement he had made, and the technical point about him being a citizen of the Gwalior Principality. And so the process of his arrest was illegal. And that is how he got away. But you must remember that the gun and Parchure had a direct connection to Savarkar, because there was a falling out between Nathuram Godse and Parchure post the Alwar session. They were going to merge their two bands of hotheads, the Hindu Rashtra Dal that Nathuram headed and the Hindu Rashtra Sena that Parchure headed, were going to merge. But they broke off because they could not decide on who would be the supremo of the merged entity. Nathuram claimed it for himself because of his proximity to Savarkar, and Parchure claimed it for himself because of his proximity again to Savarkar. And so they had fallen out. The other falling out was the share of the 60,000 given by the king of Gwalior. And so there was bad blood between Parchure and Nathuram, and there's no reason to believe that Nathuram just turned up at his doorstep and requested him that I need a gun, please give me a gun. And Parchure would say, yes, there, I'll give you a gun, and offer it to him, knowing that the gun was going to be used to murder Bapu. The only common link why he would go out of his way, stick his neck into the conspiracy, was his fanatical loyalty to Savarkar. And so all these characters have very interesting stories to note. Let me start with Nathuram Vinayak Godse.
We'll talk about Nathuram in a bit. But before that, Tushar, what kind of training did they get?
They got training in small arms use, target shooting from various distances. They got training in preparing and exploding explosives. They got training in handling hand grenades and things. They were also very, wild conspiracies of using flamethrowers and bazookas and mortars and things like that, which never fructified. There was also an attempt to buy a Sten gun and use it for murder. I don't know why they needed a Sten gun to murder one person, unless they were planning to strafe the whole prayer meeting and create a Jallianwala Bagh kind of a massacre at the Birla House in their insane attempt to kill
Okay, this is documented.
This is documented. The Sten gun procurement is documented. Remember one thing, Ashraf, nothing that I say is not documented. Everything I say over here is documented, and there is a source that if necessary we can even cite. And so the only reason that the Sten gun was not used, through Badge, Apte purchased a Sten gun just 2 months before the murder attempt on Bapu. But when they tried to handle it, they realized that None of them could handle the Sten gun. They didn't know its mechanism, they didn't know its working. And they realized that, once they start firing, it used up bullets so fast that they didn't have bullets enough to practice, to learn how to use it. And so finally, after having purchased the Sten gun for, I think, about 1,200 rupees or 2,000 rupees at that time, they abandoned it. They were going to purchase a flamethrower or a set of mortars from Goa, from the Portuguese. They didn't know what a mortar was and how much paraphernalia it entailed. So they abandoned that. They were going to purchase a flamethrower. I don't know who they were going to roast with it, but they were going to purchase a flamethrower.
There was an element of showmanship along with the
whole thing. And so this was the kind of characters who came together. And that's where, till almost the final point, the point where they failed on the 20th, it was a whole, progressing record of bunglings, of amateurs trying to do something and stumbling at every point of it. Like I told you before, they had a .32 gun with a .30 set of bullets. And they didn't know it. Even when they loaded the gun, they didn't realize that the bullets were loose in the chamber. They assumed that, no, this is fine. When they shot that gun on the morning of the 20th in the jungles behind the Hindu Mahasabha Bhavan in Delhi, to their surprise, when the gun was fired, the bullet popped out of the barrel and fell to the ground just 3 feet away from the gun, because there was no traction or velocity to the gun. And that's when the gun and bullet didn't match. And so they discovered that couldn't be used. Gopal Godse, who was Nathuram's younger brother, had served in the British Army during the Second World War, and he had been sent to Afghanistan with the British Army. And he was active in that. So he was issued a .38 Webley Scott as a service weapon during his army time. Now, Gopal Godse was a strict stickler to rules, and his life was very regimented. He did not do anything on an impulse or spontaneously. And yet, when he came back from his tour to Pune and took a discharge after the war, he decided to carry the gun, keep the service revolver, which he was supposed to surrender when he surrendered his commission. He decided to keep it, not only keep it, but he went and hid it. He buried it in the ground of their ancestral home at Uksan, near Kamshet today, in the compound. Now, there's no reason for somebody whose whole life was a regimented, rule-following life of a clerk, because Gopal Godse also became a clerk in the armory post his war posting in the British Armory at Karki, near Pune again. And so the only reason that he kept that gun was if his brother had ordered him, saying that, we'll need to use it. And he dug up the gun from from its hiding place in Uksan just 3 days before the 20th, when he joined the gang in Delhi. His brother had told him to get the gun, fetch it from Uksan and bring it to Delhi. And so Gopal Godse took it with him. He did not even open the gun from its packaging. He carried it as it is to Delhi, and at the testing site in the forest, when he opened the package and retrieved the gun, he realized that the ears in the ground had corroded the gun and it had become rusted and jammed. So the second gun also, which could have done the deed, remember this, it could have done the deed on 20th, was also useless. And so this was the kind of preparation.
He didn't check it even before taking it to Delhi.
So these were the comical characters that assembled. Now, each one of them has their own backstories, and they're as fascinating because each one of them in character was so different from the others. And yet they all welded together. And that glue that welded them together was their fanatic loyalty and following to Savarkar. Except if that glue wasn't there, there was no reason that they could have come together and stayed together and worked together.
How does a boy raised as a girl to dodge a curse on his family, one that missed a father figure, negotiate the world? How did his childhood shape his radical views as he grew up? Meet Nathuram Godse, By the way, did you know Nathuram was not his real name? Tushar, let's talk about the main one of them, right? I mean, at least as far as the assassination or the murder is concerned. Right? Tell us about Nathuram Godse, his childhood, his upbringing, his life in general.
Ashraf, let's make it very clear. Nathuram Vinayak Godse was christened Ramchandra Vinayak Godse. His name was not Nathuram. But there's an interesting story, because what had happened with him was that his parents had lost 3 of the male children in birth who were born preceding Nathuram. And so, as it was the system of that time, the family elders consulted a seer, and that seer told them that the family suffered from a curse by the family deity. And so all the male offsprings would die in childbirth. And so the family was very distressed. Vinayak and his wife were very distressed about the whole thing. And so they asked for a panacea to how to have a male progeny. And the seer told them that they would have to cheat fate. So the next male progeny who was born to them must be brought up as a girl. So fate would not know that it was a boy, and it would not play its cruel role on him. So at birth, Ramchandra, his left nostril was pierced and he was made to wear a nath. And from that point onwards, he was brought up as a girl. So in his initial years...
Just so the readers know, the nath is a traditional nose ring, a Maharashtrian nose ring that women in these parts of the country wear.
And the way it goes is that at birth, they wear a ring, a nose ring. And when they reach puberty, then they start wearing a stud, a nose stud. So that's the 2 differences. So Ramchandra, as a young boy, as an infant, had his nostril pierced and started wearing the nose ring. And his mother started dressing him up as a girl. And his hair was allowed to grow long and things. And in his early years, he was made to live the life of a girl, although he was a boy. And so he became the target of his male peers in the age group, and they would make fun of him and tease him about a boy being a girl and all that. So he was very traumatized in his childhood. In those days, everybody indulged in that kind of having fun kind of thing, and it must have been very traumatic for the child. And so he became an introvert. He used to stay away from company, go into the forest and stay on his own. And he started getting fits, which were considered to be like he was going into trances. And the family started believing that when Nathuram went into a trance, the goddess, the family deity, possessed him. And she started speaking through him, and the family would encourage the trances and then have a dialogue with the deity, asking her questions and seemingly getting those answers from Nathuram. So he had this kind of a very unnatural upbringing in his childhood. It was only after 3 more sons were born and survived that it was said that now the curse has been removed. And now it doesn't matter anymore. And that is it when almost Nathuram was 4 or 5 years old, that finally his long hair was cut and he was allowed to wear boys' clothes, and the nath was removed. But the hole in the nostril remained. And the story of the nath remained. And so he was fated for the rest of his life never to be known as Ramchandra, but to be known as Nathya instead. Right up to the end, in Pune, amongst the Maharashtrians, he was known as Nathya. And Nathuram became the name because Ramchandra, who wore the nath, became Nathuram. And that's why that name stuck to it. The curious part of it is in legal records also, they have not written the real name Ramchandra, the Christian name Ramchandra. In all records, he is always listed as Nathuram Vinayak Godse, whereas actually it should have been Ramchandra Vinayak Godse alias Nathuram. And so this is the story of Nathuram, and the result was that he became very female phobic. He could never ever have a relationship with a female. He actually abhorred the sight of women. Even though he had sisters himself, he could not ever connect with women. So he grew up as a man who hated women, who could not have a relationship with them, who could not tolerate.
In fact, his misogyny is well known now. But do you think this childhood trauma, this teasing and this upbringing that he had anything to do with the fact that actually when he began writing later, that was very violent sort of writing? You think that
I think there must be a relationship, the trauma that he suffered and the resentment that he must have had towards people who were targeting him must have filled him with rage. But what it also did was, the other thing that was important in his upbringing was the absence of his father. Vinayak was working as a junior clerk in the postal system, and so it was a very meager salary and a large family to support, and a job that was transferable. So he was continuously on the move, absent from the family. The family would live in the ancestral home, and Vinayak would be in another town serving the government. And so throughout his childhood, he did not have the protection of a father. And so his craving for a strong fatherly figure was a lifelong thing. If you look at it, while Vinayak was serving in Ratnagiri, the family moved there with him, and now Nathuram was in his mid to late teens. And at that time, Savarkar, after all his apologies to the crown, had been granted a pardon from his Kalapani imprisonment at Port Blair in Andamans, and was transported to Ratnagiri to live in isolation in the city of Ratnagiri, which is in the south of Maharashtra, a seaside town in the south of Maharashtra. And he was allowed access to people. He was just prohibited from carrying out any political activity or writing any political write-ups otherwise, and not going out of the limits of Ratnagiri, the city limits of Ratnagiri. So Savarkar was also living over there, and that was the time when Nathuram was introduced to Savarkar, and suddenly he found another very strong father figure, which he was always craving for. A strong alpha male kind of a character who he could look up to and admire. And so he came under the influence of Savarkar, and that is where the transformation of that traumatized child started happening. And the cure for the trauma was hatred. So hate was being instilled into him, and he was being pointed towards a target for that hate, where it should be focused. And that was the Savarkarite ideology that was being instilled in him. And so there again is his craving for strong male to dominate him, to take control of his life, and to guide him forward happened. And so if you look at it, he formed those kind of relationships only. He did not have a female relationship with a female at all. And his hate also got focused on another very strong male identity. Gandhi, the alpha male of the freedom movement, the entire political movement of that time. And so his adoration was also for a strong male alpha kind of a character in Savarkar, and his hate was focused also on somebody who he looked up to and admired as a strong alpha male. And the partnership that he formed also, right up to the night of the 20th of January, Narayan Apte, the second accused in the Gandhi murder, was the leader of the Godse Apte gang. Apte took all the decisions, did all the planning, did all the provisions, providing and all that. Nathuram kept following him. So all the relationships that Nathuram had in his life, the long-lasting relationships were with male characters. That was the story of Nathuram.
But that brings us to the story of Savarkar, actually.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about Savarkar too. What was his background and his motivation?
Savarkar was born in a influential and affluent Brahmin family. Grew up in the outskirts of what is today Nashik. His birthplace, his village, and his childhood were all spent over there. But he was instilled with fanaticism, which was at that time very rampant in the upper castes, because the entire upper caste system was based on exploiting all those below them. And so that dominating and subjugating ideology was a way of life over there. And so that happened, and because that was also the area where there was an equal Muslim population, and there was antagonism between the Brahmins and the Muslims over cow slaughter and masjids and everything. And so there was a focus. So right from childhood, Savarkar was also instilled with the supremacist ideology of the Hindu. And so he grew up becoming that way. Initially, he was a revolutionary. We cannot deny the fact that initially he was a revolutionary who believed that defying the British was a patriotic act, and that could only happen through violence, because that was the only ideology he believed in and subscribed to. And so he patronized the revolutionary. He was greatly influenced by the Chapekar Bandhus of Pune, who had murdered the commissioner of Pune and were then hanged and became martyrs. And even today, the Chapekar Bandhus are idolized in Maharashtra. Everybody in Maharashtra remembers their heroic deed and their action and admires them. And so Savarkar also came under their influence. He was a brilliant student, so he got into the premier institutions of that time. So Fergusson College was where he did his graduation. And at that time, he also established an organization called Abhinav Bharat, which was an organization to bring youth into the nationalistic stream, into the revolutionary stream of nationalism. And so he was rusticated out of, his degree was cancelled and he was thrown out of Fergusson College, and he was on the hit list of the government. But he had influential patrons who managed to fund him to go to England to further his studies to become a lawyer. So Savarkar reached Britain and he enrolled in the law school over there. He was senior to Gandhi at that time. And he also again established an organization of the right-wing Hindu students in London, and they started their activities over there. They got in touch with anarchists in Europe to learn about explosives and guns. And Savarkar started also writing his very eloquent articles and inflammatory in a sense. If you read his history of the 1856 uprising, he was the one who called it the first war of freedom. And if you read that, you will yourself feel very energetic and patriotic and inflamed. And, he had that charm, he had that magic in his language. And so he wrote that. And the British got hold of it, and they immediately thought that it was seditious and provocative, and so they banned it even before it was published. And then it was published clandestinely outside of India and circulated. And so at one point of time, the colonial administration in India issued an order prohibiting Savarkar from coming back to India. And so the persecution of the Savarkar started. His elder brother was targeted and arrested because I think it was the mayor of Ahmedabad or something of that sort who was murdered. And the colonial authorities alleged that the murder was supplied by Savarkar's older brother. And so he was sent to Kalapani in Rangoon, I think, or Mandalay.
This is the brother,
Savarkar's elder brother. And then the authorities claimed that the weapon was sent by Savarkar. Savarkar used to send recipes for bomb making and things hidden in his manuscripts. And there is an allegation that he also was sending guns back to India, hidden in his books and literature and things. So the British police were told to keep a watch on him. And at that time in London, Savarkar, who was now a barrister, had fallen in love with a white British girl. He was deeply in love with her. And but things became hot for him and he had to escape from England. And so he escaped to the continent and started living in France, where there were a lot of the militant Indian expats living over there, and they patronized him and gave him a board and shelter and things. And so Savarkar started writing for a periodical that was published in Paris called Talwar. And again, that came under the watch of the British. And so now Savarkar was somebody who had to be caught. So there are two versions of how he got arrested. One is that he was lovesick, pining for his English love, and couldn't stay away from her. So he sneaked into London to be with her. And the authorities who were keeping tab on him came to know about it. And they arrested him at the railway station when he alighted from the train. The other is that the love interest of Savarkar had been compromised by the British. And she was used to lure him to England. Whatever the story, I don't know what the fact is. But the fact is that when he tried to sneak into England from the railway station, he was arrested at the railway station. And at that point of time, the colonial administration revoked its previous ban on Savarkar being brought to India. And they sent a posse to take custody of him and bring him back to India to await trial for treason and sedition. And so he was arrested and handed over to the policeman from India, and an escort from England was also provided. Savarkar was being brought back to India on the SS Maurya, from which he escaped or tried to escape at Marseille. And on the way, there was a storm in the channel, and so they had to make an unscheduled stop at the port of Marseille. And Savarkar in his own, Savarkar was very well known to aggrandize his own character in his writings. He used to paint a mythical picture of the Superman that he was. And today, a lot of the Maharashtrian right-wing parties refer to him, and a lot of Maharashtrians refer to him as Swatantra Veer Savarkar. But the fact is that Savarkar himself gave him the title. It wasn't a spontaneous, like Mahatma was a spontaneous title. Bapu didn't tell anybody to call him a Mahatma. People started calling him a Mahatma. But Savarkar actually wrote about himself as being Swatantra Veer Savarkar, and that has stuck to his name. But right up to that time, it was legitimate. He had done those actions. And when the ship docked at Marseille, Savarkar claims that he realized that this was his last chance. If he could escape and take refuge in France, the British would not be able to arrest him. And so there is a very romanticized version of how he squeezed himself out of the porthole of the toilet on the excuse that he had to go to the toilet because he was fettered. His legs were in chain, his hands were in chain. So he got his jailers to take them off under the pretext of going to the toilet. And then he wriggled out of the porthole and jumped into the sea and started swimming. He was a strong swimmer in his childhood also. And he reached the port of Marseille. He got onto the dock. And there was a gendarme patrolling over there. And he caught Savarkar because he'd seen him escaping from the ship and getting onto the dock. Savarkar thought that as a French policeman, if he got into French custody, the British would not be able to claim him. But before the policeman could take Savarkar in custody, the British escort also landed up over there, and they told the French policeman the whole story. And the French policeman handed over Savarkar to them because he had seen Savarkar jumping out of the ship. And so that sealed. That was the point where the revolutionary died. And from that point onwards, the associate of the British was born. He was brought back to India and there was a trial and he was sentenced to multiple life sentences in Kalapani, almost amounting to 50 years in Kalapani, and sent to the prison, the cellular prison in Port Blair in the Andamans Islands, which was considered to be the no-return kind of place at that point of time. And only the most dangerous of the criminals and freedom fighters were incarcerated over there. The fact also remains that just within the first month of incarceration over there, Savarkar wrote his first letter to the British seeking forgiveness and a pardon from the Crown. And then that continued for the next 10 years that he was over there, finally culminating in the Crown giving him a conditional pardon from the cellular jail. Well, he was taken out of the cellular jail and brought to Ratnagiri and placed in city confinement, open jail kind of a system. The fact is that Savarkar was not made to do all those romanticized fake history that is being told to us, that he was tortured and made to do hard labor and things. He was actually made to witness all the tortures of the other inmates and the back-breaking labor that they had to do. Because the motive of the British was to try and break somebody who could be a utility later on. And they broke. They managed to break him admirably. From that point on time, Savarkar never ever uttered even one word about freedom. Everything he said was about his hatred for the Muslims and his hatred for the Congress and how they were a danger. And his all actions after that were towards sabotaging all the initiatives for freedom of the Congress and the propaganda of hatred. And so this is the story of somebody who now they want us to believe was the greatest warrior of freedom.
I must also ask you finally, for this episode at least, didn't Gandhi meet with Savarkar in London?
There are theories that they must have crossed paths. There is no official record of their having met. One of the theories that goes around is that Gandhi on his trip back from London to South Africa, in an outpouring of ideas, wrote the Hind Swaraj, which is believed to be his ideology, a crucible of his ideology, which is a series of dialogue with a protagonist. And one of the theories is that the person that the dialogue is being held with is the revolutionary. And so it could be the imaginary Savarkar. But there is no proof or record of their having met. Once back in India, while Bapu was on his tours in Maharashtra, in the provinces, he was going to pass through Ratnagiri and he expressed the desire to meet Savarkar, but he needed a permission from the British to do that. And the British denied him the permission. And it is recorded in Mahadev Bhai's diaries. Mahadev Desai was Bapu's long-term personal secretary for 25 years. And he kept a record of day-to-day activities of Bapu in his diaries. In that it is said that when he did not get permission, Bapu sent his wife Kasturba to meet Savarkar. And it is recorded in that when Kasturba came back, she warned Bapu there was something wrong about that man. She found evil in that place, and also something very strange in all those people who were around Savarkar. This was the time also when Nathuram had gone into the central entourage of Savarkar and things. So it could be that one of the persons who Kasturba referred to as being, there was something strange about that person, could have been Nathuram also. So this is the only recorded instance of a contact that Bapu could have had indirect with Savarkar.
Thanks, Tushar. In this episode of the All Indians Matter special series on Gandhi's assassination, we discuss the people behind the killing. What did the investigation into the act reveal, and what happened in the trial? What were the startling revelations that came up during it? We'll find out in part 3. In the meantime, please visit www.allindiansmatter.in. That's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer. That's ASHRAFENGINER. And All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Write to me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.